Satan, also known as the adversary, is a figure that appears in various religions and beliefs around the world. His identity varies from culture to culture and from generation to generation. He has been known as Mara by the Buddhists, Mephistopheles to the Germans, Pazuzu in ancient Mesopotamia, and Iblis by Muslims, and of course,
Lucifer,
among many other names. For Christians, Satan is the enemy of God, seeking to make believers fall into temptation and stray from the grace of Christ. Satan is also the leader of demons and fallen angels, the archenemy of God. But in the beginning, he was also an angel of God who rebelled and was cast out of heaven to earth, where he now rules as the God of this world, according to the Bible. This is what most Christians believe today. They see Satan as the source and center of all evil, often depicted as a red figure with horns, a tail, and a trident. While some see him as merely a symbol of evil rather than a real entity, others believe he is actively at work in the daily lives of Christians, interfering in their paths and trying to make them fall into sin. And I don't blame them, since their own Bible provides examples of this, such as in 1 Thessalonians 2:18, which states,
"For we wanted to come to you, certainly I, Paul, did, again and again, but Satan blocked our way."
Christians have a version of Satan that is almost as powerful as God. He is everywhere at the same time, knows the Bible, science, and the arts better than any human, and his purpose is to destroy, destroy, and destroy. But as we will see in this video, the myth of Satan is far more complicated than that. All cultures around the world have their own versions of him. So let's explore the history of Satan's origins and evolution, and question whether he is truly the evil being that opposes God, as Christians claim. But before we begin, remember to subscribe and leave a like for more videos like this. Ready? Let's begin. To start, let's see what the Bible has to say. The New Testament tells us that the entire world is under the control of the evil one in 1 John 5:19. In Matthew 25:41, Jesus speaks of an eternal fire prepared for Satan and his angels. In Matthew 13:39, Jesus compares the kingdom of God to a field with good and bad seeds. The bad seeds are the children of the evil one. In 2 Corinthians 11:14, Paul warns believers that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light to deceive people. 1 John 3:8 states that Satan has been sinning since the beginning of creation and is the father of lies. Ephesians 2:2 describes Satan as the ruler of the darkness, and in Ephesians 6:11, Paul urges believers to put on the armor of God to stand against the devil's schemes. There are many more verses in the New Testament that describe Satan as a wicked being, the enemy of God, and the leader of fallen angels or demons. But the question we must ask is, where did Christians get this idea? Did Jews believe the same about Satan? Well, let's see what the Old Testament has to say. The word Satan does appear in the Old Testament, but not in reference to an evil being opposing God, nor to a fallen angel who rebelled against Yahweh. Instead, it is used to refer to other humans. The word Satan means adversary or opponent, so it is common for it to be used to describe another human. For example, in 1 Samuel 29:4, the Philistines distrust David and call him an enemy, Satan. In Isaiah 14:12-15, the prophet compares the king of Babylon to the brightness of the planet Venus, which is known as the morning star. In Latin, this is translated as Lucifer. If we add what follows, where the king desires to be like God but is cast down to Sheol, we get the perfect recipe to believe that Isaiah is referring to a spiritual being opposed to God, whose name is Lucifer. But this is simply not true. And when the text does refer to a spiritual being, it does not depict him as an evil figure opposing God. In Job 2:1-7, Satan appears before God in heaven. They have a conversation that turns into a kind of wager on whether Job would abandon God if he lost everything. Here, Satan is not an evil being or enemy of God, but rather an accuser. The Hebrew term makes it seem more like an occupation than a personal name. The accuser is pointing at Job, trying to prove he would lose faith in God. We see this again in Zechariah 3:1-2, where Satan stands at the right hand of Joshua in what appears to be a divine courtroom. The accuser points out Joshua's sins, but the angel of the Lord plays the role of a defender, arguing that everything Joshua did was part of God's plans and purposes. In Ezekiel 28:11-19, there is another reference to the king of Tyre, describing how he was in the Garden of Eden and bore the image of God until iniquity was found in him. This passage is often used to describe Satan's fall, but this interpretation overlooks the prophet's symbolic language regarding the king of Tyre's reign and downfall. If this passage referred to Satan, it would mean that Satan's first sin occurred in the Garden of Eden, not in a rebellion in heaven. We need to be more intelligent in interpreting these texts. So far, no Old Testament passage that mentions Satan describes him as an evil being who rebelled against God and now rules the world with fallen angels. That idea simply is not in the Old Testament. What does appear is a creature that is part of God's divine counsel, as we saw in Job 2, a being that is part of God's purpose, a subordinate of God and not his enemy. The other times it appears, it refers to humans. So, the Christian concept of the Prince of Darkness, the Father of Lies, the Prince of the Air, the Great Archon, the leader of an evil government of fallen angels, evil spirits and demons, does not appear anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. The ancient Jews of the First Temple period under Solomon simply did not believe in an evil force that opposed God in the way Christians do. Later in history, as we all know, the Jews were conquered and exiled by the Babylonian Empire. During this time, the Jews did not believe in angels as leaders of other angels or in a specific enemy of God. However, scholars widely agree that something must have happened during Israel's stay in Babylon. If we add to this the influence of the Medo-Persian Empire, we end up with Jews who were totally different from those who existed before the exile. Jews with new customs, new myths and legends, and of course, a new religion. Welcome to what would later be known as Second Temple Judaism. Here, Satan went from being a simple creature subordinate to God to a mortal enemy, the arch enemy of God. He was no longer just a Satan, an adversary, but the Satan. And we owe this in part to the great influence of an ancient Persian religion called Zoroastrianism. Looking at it from a historical perspective, it is not difficult to believe that Jewish religious elites had contact with the Medo-Persian religious leaders and their religion. This resulted in an adaptation and syncretism of theological ideas passed down orally and through tradition. They had 200 years to be influenced, and when we see the similarities between this new Second Temple Judaism and the Zoroastrian religion, we undeniably find parallels between the two. For example, Before King Josiah's Deuteronomic reform, the Jews of the First Temple believed in all kinds of gods. Their supreme god was El Elyon, the Most High God, and their national and war god was Yahweh, among other deities. For them, Yahweh was not an omnipotent, perfect, or all-powerful God. But when we look at the Zoroastrian religion, we find that their God was omnipotent, merciful, perfect, and invincible, identical to the God of the Second Temple period and the New Testament. And this God was called Ahura Mazda. But this God was not alone. There was an evil being called Angra Mainyu, Ahriman, the pure incarnation of evil, seeking to destroy good. So during this long process of cultural exchange between Jews and Medo-Persians, the influence grew more and more, and we ended up with an all-powerful, perfect, loving, and merciful God who despised human and animal sacrifices but loved obedience, completely different from the Yahweh of the First Temple period, who killed both the good and the bad, loved the smell of sacrifices, regretted his decisions, and was far from perfect. The Jews of the Second Temple period syncretized Yahweh with Ahura Mazda, but also introduced an evil entity that opposed Yahweh, giving it the title of the Satan. To this we add even more influence, this time Greek, and there you have the recipe for the Satan we all know today. But this Zoroastrian influence is not just speculation. We have evidence of it in the Hebrew Bible itself. For example, in the Book of Tobit, a demon named Asmodeus appears as the antagonist of the story. But this demon is actually a lieutenant of Ahriman in Zoroastrianism. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, a character known as the Angel of Darkness was found. It is said that this angel leads the children of God into sin, and his name is Belial, a malevolent angel with authority over an army of evil angels. If we go to the New Testament, we see that Paul mentions this evil angel in 2 Corinthians 6:15, in comparison with Jesus, and in the Hebrew Bible, he appears in Deuteronomy 13:13, 1 Samuel 10:27, and other places. Little by little, we can see how the Christian concept of Satan as a malevolent entity takes shape in the Bible. If we look at the war scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls, we find that in the final days, there would be a great war where the Archangel Michael would lead an army of the children of light against the angel Belial and the children of darkness. Curiously, Paul also calls Christians the children of light in 1 Thessalonians 5:5 and other places, showing that Christianity emerged from the same Jewish sect as groups like the Essenes. But the influence is not only seen in the Bible, it is also found in texts like the Book of Enoch, which was extremely popular during the Second Temple period and was responsible for many Christian beliefs that are still held today. The Book of Enoch also speaks of a group of fallen angels, but their leader is not Satan, as Christians believe. Instead, it is an angel known as Shemihaza, and together with the other angels, they teach humanity everything, all types of evil things such as war, weapons, witchcraft, magic, among others. But contrary to what Christians believe, the Christian Satan is not behind all of this. Even more curiously, the Book of Enoch describes angels as stars and identifies Shemihaza as the first of all to fall from heaven to earth, not Satan, as Christianity teaches. We also have the Book of Jubilees, which introduces another evil character who opposes God. This figure is known as Mastema, who is also the leader of a group of fallen angels. This book was also written during the period of exile, so we can clearly see the Zoroastrian influence when it speaks of Mastema. When we bring together all this Jewish cultural context influenced by Zoroastrianism, we can notice its direct influence on the Christian movement of Jesus. At the beginning of this video, we presented several passages where Satan appears as a clear enemy of God, a powerful entity seeking to destroy creation by deceiving and tempting Christians into sin and falling from grace. Even more than just an adversary or accuser, in the New Testament, Satan can cause diseases, possess people, and devour them spiritually like a lion, as stated in 1 Peter 5:8. This aligns with Second Temple Judaism, where we see a malevolent being as God's arch-enemy in various apocalyptic texts, such as those referring to Azazel, Belial, Mastema, and others. Something completely different from what we see in First Temple Judaism, before the Babylonian exile and before King Josiah's Deuteronomic reform. So in the end, we have an evil entity opposing God and Christians. Curiously, none of this appears in the Old Testament. Christians project the adapted influences of Second Temple Judaism and, in turn, Zoroastrianism to see Satan everywhere in the Hebrew Bible. They see him in Genesis 3 as the serpent in the Garden of Eden, as the prince of Persia in the Book of Daniel, as the king of Tyre in the books of Isaiah and Ezekiel, as the spirit that tempted Job, as the one who empowered Pharaoh's magicians to turn their staffs into serpents and so on. In short, Christians see Satan everywhere in the Old Testament, even though the Satan they know does not appear anywhere in it. Even Christian beliefs, such as Satan being a cherub who rebelled against God and took a third of the angels from heaven with him, do not appear in the Bible. Christians simply use Revelation 12 to add this interpretation, but this is incorrect as well. So in conclusion, the character we now know as Satan underwent a significant evolution, from being just another servant of God to a fallen angel turned demon, opposing God and seeking to destroy his creation and Christians with his army of fallen angels, making them fall into sin while ruling the world with his wickedness. This transformation happened in part due to the massive influence of Babylonian, Persian, and Hellenistic ideas, which greatly changed Jewish beliefs. So if there's anything to take away from this video, it's the lesson that we shouldn't blindly believe everything we are told. We need to research history and the cultural context of any concept, whether it's Satan, Yahweh, or anything else. The purpose of this video is not to criticize Christians for believing in a being that does not exist, or at least does not exist as they believe, but rather to educate them, to teach them to think critically without paradigms, preconceived notions, or presuppositions. Throughout history, this has been a major obstacle to civilization's progress. In the 17th century, if a man started convulsing and foaming at the mouth in the middle of the street, people would run to seek help. But they didn't look for the police or a doctor. They sought a priest because they believed the man was possessed. So I tell you today, we need to be better than that. Let's strive to be better.